The origins and the first Cathars, the Bogomils and the heretics of Monforte. When did Catharism start? It's a question on which the scholars are not in agreement. A little before the year 1000, they started to diffuse in Europe the heresies that had many points in common with that which later became known as Catharism, but some among the more authoritative scholars find it hard to accept that. Among these heresies, the most significant without doubt is Bogomilism, which started in Bulgaria in the 10th century, and that many consider the origin of Catharism. Where the name Bogomil derived from is not known with certainty. Most believe from a Bogomil pope, but given that it means friends of God, some think it simply has to do with the name given to the adepts. The origins, in turn, of Bogomilism are often identified in Polysianism, or, in the case of Catharism itself, in Manichaeism. Polysianism was a heretical sect that between the 7th and the 10th century was spread out on the Balkan Peninsula, above all in, page 33, Armenia, but also in Bulgaria. If on the one hand, Polysianism had twofold association that connects it both with the early Manichaeism and with the later Bogomilism and Catharism, on the other hand, it has a military imposition that profoundly differentiated it from these, Catharism particularly, which stamped instead a radical non-violence. Bogomilism developed extensively on the Balkan Peninsula, with ups and downs. If it became the state religion in Bosnia in 1199 and remained so until the end of the 15th century, in other places, in Byzancio, in Serbia, in Bulgaria itself, heavy persecution rose, due to which many sought relief by fleeing towards Italy and also France. Many scholars explain the rise of Catharism in Western Europe in this way, and our hypothesis is supported by the fact that between the names that in those times came to be given to the Cathars, there are also different versions of the word Bulgars. As de Verneuil believes, in all the European languages, such terms had soon assumed a decidedly pejorative meaning. Bogre became synonymous with sodomy. Italian Bugorare has the same origin that manifested itself in the 12th century. According to others, Catharism did not arise from the propagation of Bogomilism, but instead as an awakening, a desire to guide Christianity back to a rigorously evangelistic simplicity, a need that was profoundly felt in those centuries. Other than listening to the scholars, perhaps it is a case of what the Cathars themselves said about their religion. Well, the Cathars, but also the Bogomils, considered themselves the sole custodians of the original evangelical message, and they claimed direct succession from the apostles. Moreover, they believed themselves the successors of that Church of John that existed from the beginnings of Christianity next to the more organized Church of Peter. The latter soon wanted to be the only church, the universal church, Catholic means universal, and no longer tolerate more divergence, also degraded itself to compromise with the powerful and inevitably distanced themselves from the evangelical dictates. However, a nucleus faithful to the gospel had always continued to operate, hidden, transmitting the doctrine and original rites across the centuries, particularly baptism, by means of the laying on of hands that, as, page 34, numerous passages testify to in the New Testament, was practiced by the apostles to confer the Holy Spirit. I give just one example. Then they laid their hands and these received the Holy Spirit. Acts 8, verse 17. Whoever received the Holy Spirit could transmit in their turn, and so, in an uninterrupted chain, the practice, and what matters more, the Holy Spirit, would have been transmitted for centuries by the good Christians. It is difficult to believe in the effective possibility of a clandestine transmission protracted for such a long period of time, 8 to 9 centuries, but insomuch as the Cathars believed that they never get tired of affirming that their church is the true church of God, that of Christ and the apostles, in contraposition to the usurping Roman Church. The Occitan ritual affirms, in fact, that this holy baptism through which the Holy Spirit is transmitted was in the custody of the Church of God from the time of the apostles up to today, and was being transmitted by good men to good men up to now. As Francesco Zambon writes, Bernard Guy accused the Cathars of having aped the sacraments of the Church of Rome. In reality, these conserved the same rites to an earlier evolutionary state. Other scholars also agree in the belief that the rites of the Cathars are surprisingly similar to those practiced in the earliest times of Christianity. At the start of the 11th century, in various parts of Europe, in France, Germany, and also in Italy, groups of heretics whose beliefs, for what little is known of them, present characteristics that will then be characteristic of Catharism. They soon came to be condemned to be burned at the stake, without bothering to get to know their doctrine, and without understanding that they were the expression of a felt need for profound reformation. As regards Italy, it concerns the so-called Cathars of Monforte. 2 brief chronicles of the time exist about this affair that narrate how, discovering a group of people suspected of heresy around the castle of Monforte d'Alba from Asti, one of their representatives was interrogated by a Roberto d'Intimiano, Bishop of Milan. Recognized as heretics, they were taken to Milan, where in the area, page 35, that today is still called Monforte, in case practically nobody knows the origin of the name, they erected a large crucifix and a fire, and were asked to choose if they would abjure their own fate on the way to the crucifix, or go into the fire. The chronicles say that almost everyone, starting with the Countess, who it seems was called Liberta, went into the fire. This took place in the year 1031. One has to wonder, isn't it a bit strange that in those times and in those places that it might only be that small heretical community? Arno Borst believes that in the castle of Monteforte about 30 nobles met, among whom was the countess of the place. The number of 30 seems to me to be excessive for a small village. Probably the nobles of the neighbouring regions also took part in the meeting. And then, why take them to Milan? Perhaps because at Milan a burning would have much more resonance and potential to deter. But deterrence against whom? I believe it is legitimate to assume that there was already a heretical presence in Milan.